Hello, welcome. We're gonna give it a few minutes for some people to hop on. We just hit that live button, so let's give it a few seconds so we could at least be talking to one person other than the four of us. So I know somebody hop on, but yeah. So welcome to the sexual miseducation of Black men. As you see, I'm joined by some very distinguished brothers this evening, and we're gonna have a very interesting conversation. You know, the topic for tonight is the sex industry of slavery, the sex industry of slavery. But if you've been on here before and you've seen one of my past episodes for the sexual miseducation of Black men, you understand that there's really a place where we gather, where we can explore and examine some of the unhealthy habits, some of the unhealthy lessons that we have learned as Black men about sex. We talk about ways those lessons and those habits has affected us mentally, emotionally, relationally, behaviorally. Because a lot of the times when it comes to those unhealthy sexual habits that we've practiced, if we're not able to really identify it and to examine them, we can never improve on them, of course. Another reasons why we have these conversations is to help the next generation of men to develop and not make some of the same mistakes that we have made in our past. So this is also a teaching tool. I have a son that's 13. He's coming of age, and these conversations that I have with the men can be very helpful to him. It can always supplement some of the conversations that I have with him personally. I can sit down and watch the broadcast with him, and let it be a teaching tool, a teaching lesson for him as well. Then, of course, one of the biggest reasons why I have these conversations, or why I developed this whole sexual miseducation movement, is to help grown adult men to overcome one of the biggest temptations that I feel gets in our way of seeing our purpose, gets in the way of us fulfilling our assignment in life. Is that temptation of sex, the temptation of lust. I would venture to say that sex and lust probably has gotten in the way of us reaching goals. Has gotten in the way of us fulfilling our assignments in life. And so for some of us, it's been one of the biggest hurdles of being that man that we're supposed to be, especially as Black men, especially in our community, with the things that we've been taught, the things that we've seen, the lessons that we've learned. So, as I said, the topic for tonight is the sex industry and slavery. And I'm specifically speaking about this in honor of Black History Month. I've done shows about the message and the music that we've listened to growing up. I've done shows on peer pressure that we felt to have sex growing up, or even as men. I've done shows on pornography, and how that can be such an addiction, and such a temptation for us. But being that it's February and it's Black History Month, I wanted to not ignore what I believe is probably the origin of a lot of the sexual miseducation that we've learned as Black men, or at least passed down through generations, and examine some of the parallels that I see in the things that we do now and some of the things that was done to us back then. So first, let's start with some introductions. Just jump right in. I know for some of y'all, some very familiar faces. For some of y'all, it's some new faces. So please introduce yourselves and let's get into this conversation.
Well, my name is Gregory Devon. I'm a pastor out of Durham, North Carolina. I'm a pastor of a church in Oxford, North Carolina, called New Grassy Creek Baptist Church Incorporated. I've been in ministry now about 21 years, and I enjoy a plethora of conversations outside of the church and inside of the church, from relationships, sex, marriage, politics, anything. I'm looking forward to engaging you guys tonight in conversation.
My name is Nathaniel Leggy. I am a business owner, but I'm also a history nerd, specifically a Black history nerd. So I just really looking forward to having these conversations.
You on mute?
My name is Ahmed Butler. I'm a father. I'm a husband. Um, and like Nathaniel said, I definitely am a Black history nerd, a history nerd. I love to read. Um, and I thank AB, for inviting me.
Okay, great. Then I appreciate you, brothers, for taking the time out your schedules to join. You know, Gregory, Pastor Gregory. We've been on several panels together. I had the pleasure of having my brother on tonight, and that's I could truly call him my brother. He's probably one of the old. I can't even say friend. That's my god brother. Probably known Nate since I can't even remember. since
We go back.
we were little. Yeah, I can't even
I,
remember. So
I don't know if people, I don't know if you wanted people telling people age, but it's more than it's at least it's at the very least 30 years.
I love it.
man, it's probably more than that, man. It's probably more than that. So yeah, and I know that your mom was a big history buff and used to push that Black
Yeah,
history on us. So
yeah,
I know it runs through the veins. So
yeah.
first question that I have for you guys is, like, when you first saw the title of the sex industry of slavery, what was the thoughts that popped in your mind when you saw that title, the sex industry of slavery?
Well, I first thought exactly what it said, the sex industry of slavery. And, I consider myself to be, a student of history. I knew exactly where that title was going. And I think that uh, sex is an overlooked part of slavery. And we don't realize how much of an impact it has on men and women of African descent today. I mean, whether it is, how the elite white women would, go after these big Black guys who were slaves, and how that transferred today. Today, I'm not saying that it's a Black man's fantasy for a white woman. But what I am saying is that when you hear of those relationships, there are some similarities in the depiction and the description of why they are together. You know, what they said, that he is her Mandingo king. That's a reference to slavery. It's an unconscious reference, but it's a reference that we don't sometimes think about. Well, back in slavery, that was a secret relationship. But what happens sometimes today? It's a secret relationship because why? Because you sometimes don't want anyone to know at first because you are afraid of what? The consequence. Same thing back then. I am afraid of the consequence of us being together. So let's keep this thing a secret. You know, why was she so enthralled by this Black man? Because he was big, because he was well endowed. Well, now today, what becomes the measuring stick of manhood? How well endowed you are, how good you are in the bed, or how good one thinks you are in the bed. They look at a Black man's feet, they look at his hands, try to figure out what's he working with. Again, how different is that from how they used to pick slaves? Well, who was the biggest? Who's got the biggest penis if he's a man? You know, so a lot of these things are subliminally passed down through generation. And although we are so far removed, so we think, from slavery, I'm gonna say this and I'm gonna end, I promise. Look at how they pick athletes at the combine in the NFL. Who the biggest one? Who got the biggest feet? Same thing. There's similarities between this NFL combine and the NFL is what? 75% black. I guess the N stands for Negro. You know, but again, we pass this stuff down and we find it in all different parts of society, from relationships to sports, entertainment, anything. But it is not until someone like A.B. Bracewell has a conversation platform and allows this thing to be packaged right that people can now have a conversation.
I think when I think about the title, my first thought is the power dynamic. Just the difference in the power dynamic. Just it's sex for commerce, and it's the decoupling and the dehumanitization of an entire group of people. I mean, they were taking people and breeding them like animals, like dogs. Like, we wouldn't even. I was thinking about this the other day. There are people out there who are actively protesting against puppy farms, which are basically breeding, trying to breed purebred puppies. But they were doing this to people.
Right.
You know, where people didn't have the right of ownership of their bodies.
Right.
And that's just the idea of not having agency over your own body. That's like the only thing that you have is you. And for you not to be able to have any type of control or any type of agency as to what you could eat, what you could drink, and what could be done with your body. Like how many children you could have. You were expected to start having children at 12 and 13 years old. I mean, what does that do? Like the idea and the concept of having a real partner, you were not allowed to dictate who your partner could be. That's so crazy to me. But I don't want to hog all the stage.
So when I thought of it, one of the biggest things, I don't think that a lot of people understand when the master or the slave owner used to rape the women, it caused a rift between that man, that man who was supposed to be her husband, and the and the young lady who was assaulted, because it made her feel like he couldn't protect her, and it made him feel like was she enjoying this? Is this something she brought on? And these are things I learned by reading in books. I was like, it kind of blew my mind. It's like, how would she start mistrusting him? How would he start mistrusting her? But it was all a part of breaking us down with each other. If you get them to mistrust each other, look, I have further dominance over them. So when I thought about that, because I did a lot of reading and research on it, I was like, wow, somebody's bringing this to the forefront, and we can have a platform on it.
How we were chosen as slaves has a lot to do with now how we view ourselves as men, because we were mischaracterized back then, but that has become how we have seen ourselves over the years. This is part of the reason as to why you have more black little boys who want to be LeBron James, who want to be Michael Jordan, this is my generation, as opposed to who want to be Thurgood Marshall. you know, W.E.B. Du Bois. We're not striving after things that this can take us. We are relying on our athleticism, how fast I can run, how high I can jump. Now, in a nutshell, there's nothing wrong with having athleticism, but there is something wrong if you cannot see yourself outside of that. If you and it's proven, what happens to these athletes when they retire, when they can't rely on their running fast or being strong? They don't have the financial literacy or the mental capacity to function because they have been relying on what they have told made them who they are. They never learned to think. Gave them a free pass in school, especially if you were born in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. We're pushing people through school. Why? If you can win this championship for us, we'll push you on through. So it's never allowing a black man to understand who he is, to even have value in who he is. He doesn't know who he is. Now, you know, to Nathaniel's point, so to speak, and America's point, so to speak, as well, about, you know, us in regard to women. Well, if we've been told that the measure of ourselves is the size of our manhood, then we put ourselves in a position automatically to be what? Disrespectful.
I mean, but think about what you just said. You didn't even, we can't even, the thought process that your penis is a euphemism for your manhood.
Yes, sir.
Think about that for a second.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And that's so crazy.
Yeah. Yeah.
That your penis is a euphemism for your manhood.
But those are the things. That's one of the biggest things that is used to measure our manhood these days. Yeah. That what was used back then, and it still carry on today. You know, the size of your penis, how many women you could get, how good you could perform in bed. Like, there's nothing about your character, nothing about integrity, nothing about honesty, hard working. That doesn't measure our manhood. In today's society. So it is the biggest things growing up is that's what it was. And when I think about this whole sex industry of slavery, as I was doing my research, it made me think back to when the transatlantic passage, when that was actually abolished. And I think that's when slavery kind of took a turn into that sex industry, because they could no longer transport Africans from Africa anymore. That was unlawful. So, you know, how else would slave master? How else would slave master make money? They had to start, like you said, Nate. They had to start breeding humans because they couldn't, they couldn't transport them by the millions or the thousands, however amount of number was. So the ones they had on the plantation, they had to start breeding them, and started to, I shouldn't say start impregnating as early as 15, because that probably was going on before that. But I know it definitely increased because we can no longer go to Africa and bring them here. So we had to, produce them right here. So just like property, like you're saying.
So crazy. I mean, the idea, like I said, going back to not having but I still never got over, like when I was going back through all of the, looking up some things for this talk, that the idea of your agency is the thing that really just completely, like, the dehumanization and bringing you down to just your basic parts. Like you were a machine to be ripped apart, and and that's what you were. You became your sexual member, the pieces of you that were good for whatever, if you were in agriculture or whatever you were, particular area of farming or whatever it is that you're being used for as a slave. If you had big arms or big feet, or if you had really big thighs or whatever it was that made you a better slave. The idea that, people were just using you for those particular parts, and that they would, you know, like there was a guy that was saying that he had fathered over 300 children.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, think about that for a second.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, at a certain point, it's not because he wanted to have. This was not because he was sitting up there going, "Ooh, I'm gonna get all the women." No, he was just a tool.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What does that do to you psychologically? And you know, I'm not one of these people that believes in like reincarnation and stuff like that. But you know, so when people say things like, you know, we got to ask the ancestors and stuff like that, that's not my thing. But what I do believe is that our ancestors, through our, you know, the previous generation, passed on information through the words that they spoke and things like that. They passed that information down to us, those lessons, those pieces of programming to us. And those remnants that were passed on to us that helped them survive, unfortunately, are still with us. Those ideas of manhood is the size of your penis. Yeah. Those ideas of, you know, tall, dark, and handsome. I mean, just all of those different things. It's just so crazy.
So let's dive deeper into that, because that's where the conversation was going anyway. And you know, we've been talking about how some slaves were purchased just basically based off the size of their penis, because they believed the more well endowed a slave was, you know, it increased the probability or his chances of getting more women pregnant. Now we know that was a fact. So what parallels, I know Greg and you mentioned it a little bit, what parallels do we see that in the psychology of men today? Because, you know, back then a slave that was well endowed and got the most women impregnated even got preferential treatment. You know, they were treated with some type of favor. What's the parallels y'all see in today's society?
Well, I think it's a wasted seed, man. You think about when you look at the fact that sometimes slaves were chosen by the size of their penis, by the size of the man, their feet, you know, and thought that if this is a big guy, he has a big penis, he can impregnate a lot of women. Look at today. You have men wasting their seed by creating a child that you have no intention of taking care of, because you think that, well, the only thing you have accomplished sometime in life is the birth of a child or fathering a child. And sometimes that becomes the only accomplishment that some men have. You know, maybe you didn't graduate high school. Maybe you've done nothing with your life, but you know you can do one thing well, or you can accomplish one thing, and that's bringing a child to the world. Well, you don't take care of this child. But that mentality comes from, well, back hundreds of years ago, you didn't have to. Now, the reasons were different. They couldn't take care of their own children sometime then, because sometimes the children that you birthed with your wife were stripped from you, which not only affects this man, now you have to talk about why today you have Black women who are so cautious and careful with their children. Sometimes that love and even that overly loving nature comes from the fact that you don't want to see anything happen to these children where they're stripped away from you. There were so many women back then who had their children stripped from them, you know, but then you have the responsibility of doing what? Taking care of the master's children, which puts a strain on a woman's sense of who she is and what she's about and her purpose, because what she wants to do for her own kids, she can't, because they've been taken from her. Now she has to do what? Breastfeed master's children. Before that, she has to do what? The same as this man, she had to endure public humiliation by being stripped. Mm-hmm. She becomes what? Now this whole Jezebel complex, a seductress. Mm-hmm. Only her sexuality is the sense of who she is because she's been reduced to that. They're looking at her. She's got big breasts, big hips, childbearing hips. Now the thought is she can produce what? More slaves. When the big male slave comes to this woman slave with the nice hips, they'll produce more babies. You know what I'm saying? Well, now look what happened today. Reality television. Reality television does nothing but embarrass Black women. They're on these reality shows, and all they are demonstrating is how good they look, how sexual they can be. Everything they wear, just about, is giving a depiction of how sexy she believes she is, and she may very well be. But she cannot see herself beyond how she looks. She cannot see herself beyond her breasts, her hips, and her thighs. Why? Because she has been socialized and conditioned to believe that's who she is. The same for men. It's the same for women. We've been conditioned as Black men and women to limit ourselves to what they said makes us who we are.
Ooh. That's crazy right there.
Ahmed, what's your thoughts on that, Ahmed?
I agree with Pastor Gregory. He's absolutely right. You know, from slavery time on. Because think about it. When you take it from a culture of Africa who celebrate everything, you know, about you, you take it from you know, you have men who are put up and said you're kings, and you have, you know, people telling you to celebrate your woman, that's your queen, and things of that nature. And you taken from that, and you put in a place where everything that you celebrated that was good about your culture, you know, they break it down. They take your queen and they, you know,
breaking up a
definitely. I feel him on that though. Okay. I feel him on that.
I wanted to bring up this point. I don't know if a lot of people know about this. I don't know if a lot of people know about this, but there was such thing as not just assaulting the queens, they assaulted the kings. They I don't know if you all know about breaking a bronco. They called it breaking a buck. They raped men. You know, they tried every way to break down, you know, the Black man and Black woman. So
yeah. The thing that I found, you know, I was telling AB about this. You know, I actually did a paper on just like the structure of the Black family. The thing that I found the craziest was the resiliency of the Black family. Mm-hmm. Even after all of the things that they had endured, and all of the trials and tribulations and slings and arrows that were like the dehumanization. I don't know why I'm having so much trouble with that word today, but the dehumanization that they had gone through, they still went out there and like, you know, they like to say things like, you know, Black fathers don't care about their children and stuff like that. Those men still went and looked after and looked for those children. They looked for those families that had been sold. I mean, even during slavery, the way that they found a lot of runaway slaves, they looked for those, they figured out where those children were, where those wives were, and that's how they found a lot of the runaway slaves, looking for their families. Yeah. The resiliency is what is so crazy to me. I don't know how we have endured and gotten to this particular point through living in this system that was not built for our success.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's a good point, Brother Nathan. That's a very good point. I think a lot of people don't understand that The mindsets we have today are a lot of the mindsets that we didn't have, but because of slavery we have now, and we're trying to get out of that mindset. We're still trying to get out of a lot of the slavery mindsets. We're still trying to get out of some of the woe is me mindsets, instead of becoming sufficient mindsets. Instead of, we're still trying to battle past that.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. That's definitely still trying to battle past all of that.
And I think the struggle with that is coming back. You're breaking up, Ahmed.
Hello? Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So what I'm saying is that, what you were saying, Brother Nathaniel, was right. We the resiliency, we're trying to get back to that. We have to get back to that. And it is called I know they did studies of, it's called the slave mentality. You still have it. A lot of us still have it. It's called crabs in the barrel mentality. We still have that. But it was not, when we first came over here, we didn't have any of that. It was developed in that slave time.
Yeah. And that thing that they often call the slave mentality, what it truly is trauma. Is trauma. Yeah. And I think a lot of people understand trauma with like something directly happening to you. Like if you were in a car accident, every time you hear tires screech or a horn blow, you might, feel some type of fear or some type of alertness. But there's also a thing called vicarious trauma, where something can happen to someone else way across the globe. But just because you know about it or you've seen it, it can still create that same type of fear, that same type of anxiety inside of you. Like 9/11 is a great example of something like that. All of us that lived through 9/11, we may not have been there when the towers fell, but I guarantee we was shook to get on airplanes for a long time after that. Hello. So is that vicarious trauma that is passed down from generations and centuries of slavery?
That's what I was going to say. I was going to talk about generational trauma too.
Yeah, we'll call it slave mentality, but in the psychology world, that's trauma. We're traumatized as a people, and even it's more trauma because we develop in that trauma. So it begins to seem like that's normal. Developmental trauma. When you develop in the midst of a trauma and everybody is going through that, everybody's experienced that, and everybody is exhibiting that same type of behavior, you think it's normal because everybody's doing it. But it's not normal. Everybody's just traumatized. Right.
There's so much generational brokenness, period, within the Black family that goes back to slavery. But the reason that Black people cannot talk about it amongst each other is because you have those who have a limited thinking process, that you don't want to understand the reasons behind why certain things exist, because it's seen as an excuse, and it's not. There's so much generational brokenness that stems back to slavery, affects the Black family. From a slave couldn't cry back then, and what do you have now? Black men are afraid to do what? Cry. Because why? Yeah. He thinks if he cries, he's less of a man. Well, you would have been less of a man back then, because they told you that you're not supposed to cry. When you look at the way in which we function with each other, some of the trauma, as you mentioned, that exists between Black men and Black women is due to the fact, as a whole, the Black woman has not forgiven the Black man for not protecting her. That's the truth. As a whole, you have not forgiven the Black man for not protecting you, even when the question is how. How could he protect you? He could risk his life and die. Now, that is what a man should do if it comes down to it, for his wife and his children. But when you're faced with that reality and you're not of a conscious mind to think that, well, this is what I should do, in that moment, he's thinking, I'm going to save my wife and children by allowing them to be sold. If I try and stop it, not only will they kill me, they'll probably kill them for fighting too. But no one ever has that conversation. Today, you have Black women who expect and should expect for their man to what? Protect them.
Yeah. Let me interrupt you real quick. Pastor, let me interrupt you real quick.
Yeah.
Because you're going into something that's very important as you start to talk about the Black woman. Y'all know we have a sister waiting backstage, and I want to bring her on so she can join the conversation. And you know, she got some questions for us, and she got some input on what we'll be talking about. But we're gonna welcome her on, and I want you to continue on your point about just that relationship between Black men and black women when it comes to slavery. But let's welcome Dr. T on to the platform.
Hey,
how you doing, Doc?
I am good. I got all kind of notes. I'm ready. Like I can't keep up with all the things of the conversation. So I love it. I love it.
Okay. Well, real quickly, introduce yourself. You know, we're in the midst of the conversation, but I want you to introduce yourself.
My name is Dr. Tia, or Dr. Tia. Doc Tia, as my students call me. I'm a Midwest educator. Y'all gonna hear my Southern voice because my family is from the South. So
what part?
New Orleans, not New Orleans, from New Orleans. So yeah, so I am honored to be here like you all. I don't claim to know all the history things, but I love diving into it. I love it. So I'm excited. Thank y'all for having me amongst you distinguished gentlemen.
Welcome. So let's dive back. And I know you, like you said, you're taking notes, and I know you got some questions for us. So we're going to dive back into what Pastor Gregory was saying, and then we're going to come back to you, Dr. T, and
all right,
see what thoughts you have.
Yeah, what I was saying is that, the divide between the Black man and the Black woman, it stems from the fact that back then the expectation was still for him to protect her in that moment and his children. And I think the misunderstanding was that he probably thought that he was protecting them by allowing them to be sold, because at least they're still living. And the hope was one day we will meet again. And there were circumstances where some did meet back up. Like, things happen, trauma experience, yes. But the misunderstanding of the separation has created now separation anxiety. This is why now you have Black women and Black men having so much frustration and fight about what? Whose struggle here in America is greater? When the reality is, does it matter? We are both struggling. So can we not reconnect and let's move forward together and stop comparing pain? But until we address the elephant in the room, and that is the anger, the tension, the turmoil that exists from hundreds of years ago, that's been passed down generation to generation, which is being misinterpreted by both genders, because we're not doing what? We're not having conversation. We're talking at each other, and our anger is coming out. And we think that some of this anger is just about today. It's not. You ever been angry and didn't know why? You've been mad at your partner and you don't even know why. Because again, you've been socialized and conditioned. And until we start talking about not just the conscious mind, the unconscious mind, the subconscious mind, about things that are programmed that you did not know you were programmed to think, programmed to do. Because again, this did not start with you or your granddaddy or He started way back before you even thought about it. And you don't realize how much of what you do now goes back there.
Amen.
So, Dr. T, you got questions for us, or you want me to ask you a question?
I got questions. I got comments. I don't even know where to start. I got like 3 pages. Because
Start from the top, girl. Start from the top.
Oh Jesus, I don't. Oh Lord. But so
now,
I don't know. There is no top. Y'all have made a lot of great points.
Yeah, I got a question, and I definitely because Pastor Gregory started to touch on it, but I definitely wanted to pose the question to the rest of y'all as well. As we start talking about Black women in slavery, the Black men and Black women was treated inhumane back there, of course, and Black women, in order to be treated a certain way, they had to be pathologized at a certain level. Now, I wanted to discuss some of the
SAT word. I need you to break that down. That's the SAT word. I need you to break down pathologize for me.
For example, I've read and do my research that it was said that the size of a Black woman's butt labeled her as being lustful. And because she was lustful, she was, it was justifiable to rape her. It was justifiable to mistreat her in that way. I've read because of the size of her hips that translated to her obsession with sex. And this is the justification they used back then during slavery days. They try to use that to justify why they can treat her in this manner. So that's when you pathologize somebody, you're saying the nature of them. There's something wrong with their nature, which causes them to be a certain way. So they were saying because of that, the way her body was shaped, it was in her nature to be lustful. It was in her nature to want this. So they try to use that to justify the rape of our Black women. So the question is, with that, what parallels do we see in today's time when we think about that type of pathology? Not saying that that's the cause of what we see now, but it's definitely a copy in some way. And I don't know if brothers know that they're copying some of the ways and some of the justifications that were used back then and still using it now, but I definitely can see it.
I would definitely say that it would probably, if I had to guess, it would probably be from the standpoint of if you had a slave master who was having a sexual relationship with a slave, he could not say that the reason that he was having sex with this person was because he wanted to. It had to be something about this woman that trapped him into having intercourse with this person. It had to be something about them. It couldn't be that it was his internal lust of the flesh. It was her fault that he threw himself onto her. And when you hear these men talking about these things, now they're talking about this openly because most of the time they didn't see their slaves as people. So they were having these open conversations about these women not in front of their children, but in front of the slaves, possibly in front of that woman's husband. I mean, and these conversations get passed on to other people and to other people and to other people around the plantation. So it becomes a thing where Sally is just so, it's just somehow Sally becomes the predator as opposed to Mr. Tom being the predator. And, you know, but as a slave, you don't hear all of that. You don't see all of that. All you see is the person who's in charge telling you that it's Sally's fault that this happened. And that builds, and that, I deal a lot with neurolinguistic programming, which is the idea of, you know, like your how words can program how you think. And when you pass these words on to people, especially from somebody who's in a position of authority, it sits inside of you, and it shows you how you. It dictates a lot of times how you function and how you see the world. That's just crazy to me. But I don't want to monopolize everything.
No, but you are.
Go ahead, Doc.
So, and without also monopolizing, I got to take it back a little bit because I just talked about some of this with some of my students. So we can take it back even a little bit. One of the things we talked about was the creation of race, and the creation of race was not made until after slavery was a thing, because we as in those who enslaved us, right, have to justify why it's okay to enslave people. Therefore, we were made to be less than, we were made to be monsters. So as you said, Nathaniel, in order to justify why I had sex with this woman, I can't allow people to know that I'm having sex with this monster, right? I there's no way that I would do such a thing. Now, with that as well, so I want to back up.
Like me.
Huh?
Good Christian man like me.
So, but I want to back up a little bit too. So, a very awesome conversation that my pastor in Georgia had, Dr. Tamara, I can't remember her last name, and they were talking about, is God sexist, and how Black men are also a product of patriarchy, in the way that the behaviors of Black men and how Black women should be regarded as well have been forced upon them through slavery. And so not only is it by the master, you're making this woman look a certain way, it is then because the master says this is what this woman is and this is what she looks like, now the Black man is thinking in this way. And so I want to point out as well, so kind of moving from that to Gregory, your point that you mentioned about the kind of rift between Black men and women today, as it's stemming from Black women not forgiving Black men. But I want to challenge that thought in terms of the ways in which Black men have not forgiven Black women who they found out maybe were raped by the master, and then it was made out to be, well, you didn't fight him off, you didn't fight that's your fault, and so I want to challenge that part. I have another challenge to that too, but but we're talking about the ways in which Black women are pathologized, and to get academic and technical, is the way that people are regarded and treated as psychologically abnormal or unhealthy. And so it is the slave master forcing upon our women and our men how we should be viewed. And even going into the Black family, keep in mind, because we were bred like animals, it wasn't all family. You know, it really wasn't all family. And so then in some cases, you know, where those slaves that were the top bull, right? I gotta take care of my top bull. He then became that celebrated promiscuous man, because he received that top treatment, that preferential treatment, and the women just became his tool, essentially. And so I know that like that's a few branches, right? We can go off into when it comes in to those things, but I'll stop.
I agree 100% with you on everything that you just said. You know, and I think that your point is compatible with the point I made because they're both correct. They really are. You know, and this whole thing about, you know, pathologizing, you know, it is to make what is normal abnormal. And it is almost a synonym for manipulate, because I will take you as a Black woman, and I will call your big breasts, your big hips, your thighs abnormal when I secretly fantasize about those things. That's why this relationship is in secret, because as you said, I can't make it public. I can't make it known that I feel this way because I've called you a monster. And I've created this thing called race to separate you from being just like I am, just a few shades darker. We're same God made us, but I have to tell you and use what is essentially not the best part about you, but some of your best features, your big lips, your wide nose, that are wonderful features, but I make you feel bad about them. I fantasize about them. Now I use what is normal to control you, because I have made you feel bad about yourself. Even though hundreds of years later, let's come to present day, everybody want to look like a Black person. From the full lips to the, I won't say everybody, but we're seeking to have Black features. Those who are not Black.
Right. They do, but they don't, right?
These noses, you know, they're trying to do what? I said earlier, the NFL is what? Black. The NBA is what? Black. They're making money off of the things that they wanted us to feel bad about ourselves about. Now it's capital gain. But they did not teach us what? How to think. Because the reality is this. Okay, there's nothing wrong with athleticism, right? But along the line, why did we not ever think, instead of us allowing them to capitalize off and have us be the face of $1 trillion athletic industry, we did not learn how to make our own. All the wealth that could be in the Black community, if this money that we're generating, whoever signs that $1 billion check is the one with all the money. So while we're thinking that the LeBron James and the Michael Jordan and whoever is rich, and they're wealthy, the person that signs their check has even more. Even now, when we have all this about not being able, because we're Black, to buy into sports teams, because you have to be allowed in. And it ain't about your money, but skin color. Why have we never thought, with all the Black millionaires and billionaires that we have, to come together and to make a professional league? I commend people like Ice Cube for having the big three. But if that can be done, we can also come together and pull this money and have another version of the NBA that is exclusive to us.
That's what's up. That's what's up.
So to your point, sorry, go ahead.
No.
I'm sorry. What?
No, go, brother. Go. Okay. Y'all go.
Say
monopolizing the conversation. Go ahead.
No problem. I was going to say, let's take it back to the beginning. I don't know if you all know about a African race who was renowned for having big hips, big butts, and it's this one young lady who they brought over here. Her name was, and they named her Sarah.
Sarah, yep.
Yeah. So they brought her over here, and the person who took her, he had a sexual relationship with her, but then he also abused her as well. Right. So think about it. We're gonna take it from there, and then we're gonna say the slave master who never saw a woman with big hips, big, thick thighs, big lips like this, move like this, work like this, who expressed herself like this. Because we know one thing we know about Black women, and I know about my wife and other Black women, you all express yourselves with your movement. You do a lot of movement, and it's not a negative thing, but it's just the way you are. So think about it. Look at a slave master looking at a woman move like this again, and she's expressing herself, and he hasn't seen this. So he's thinking, wow, it's something different. He's looking at it one way, the white mistress is looking at it another. So a lot of people mistook and misused something that was a natural way for an inhumane and unnatural way, if you understand what I'm saying. A lot of people didn't understand what from the male and the female standpoint, how I would say Africans were. They didn't understand their makeup. They didn't understand their body. They didn't understand how they were. So it both let me say this word, infuriated them, and it intrigued them. It made them do some things that, I really shouldn't do. But these people intrigue me, not just for profit, but other needs as well. If you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah, because Sarah was exploited.
Right.
She was made to be a poster of this voluptuous Black woman.
Right. Because
okay. What I will say, I'm gonna jump in real fast. It was also the power dynamic of it. He didn't have to get this woman.
He did
this woman, exotic woman who he had never seen before, and he had full control over her. Yeah. We can't forget that part. He had full and complete control over every aspect of her life. There was nothing she could do. She could not. It had to be intoxicating to be a man to say to this woman, you have to give me sex in the manner and the style that I want it.
He controlled her through that violence and through the threat of her life.
Yeah.
And her children's life.
Yeah. Yeah. Earlier, AB, I think that you asked something in regard to what one thinks about the one who is pathologized. And I want to say this. I don't want to turn to Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John. Let's turn to the book of R&B. BBD said, don't trust a big butt and a smile. That girl is poison. Now, we all know the song, but let's think about it for a minute. How often do we pathologize each other? And we say, as adults, like coming up, I was born in 1981. So I came from a generation where, she fast, she promiscuous. And it's based upon what? Nothing that she's done, nothing that she said. It is strictly about how she looks. Because she's 13 or 14, and she has developed earlier than most. She's full figured now. She's 13, but she looks 25. So because of something that is normal, she has no control.
And she has an outgoing personality.
Hello. We have characterized her by her condition, so to speak.
Yeah.
But it's not even just seen, let me go to the Bible. Throughout the Bible, we pathologize people and we characterize them by what? Their condition. The man, the woman with the issue of blood, the man with the withered hand, blind Bartimaeus. We're given no thought as to who these people are. Doubting Thomas. We characterize them by a moment, or we characterize them by a condition, and we don't realize that some of this stuff go way back. We're talking about slavery, which was hundreds of years ago. I'm talking about back in Africa, thousands of years ago. You know what I'm saying? Because, I mean, make no mistake, those who watch it, Egypt is in Africa. Just want to point that out. But this stuff has been, again, passed down thousands, not just hundreds of years. So now we, with each other, characterized by what we do, what we see. And we don't realize, yeah, it's a part of slavery, but it's also been taught to us biblically some too. But nobody wants to say that, because don't say nothing about the Bible now. Because Big Mama said don't do that. But anyway, we have to realize how detrimental that is to relationships. Talking about between folk, period. You know, not romantic, but period. You know, when I cannot see you for who you are, I see you for what you've done. I see you for how you look. I see you for what they said about you. I've been living for 40 years and I've never met they. But they said everything. They said this. They did. I never met they at all. But it's always a they said conversation. And that takes away from us actually being genuine inside of a romantic relationship, inside of a marriage, inside of a friendship, inside of a business partnership. Because why? Because we are looking at people with the lens of bias, not the lens of love. Because we have been taught that there has to be conflict before there's agreement. Because your bias automatically creates a conflict. Because again, you have dehumanized people. You've taken away the human experience and put bias in its place, and nobody likes anybody. This is why sometimes you wake up sometime and you just feel some type of way. Yeah. Ain't nobody done nothing to you. Ain't nobody said anything. But you think that everything's against you. When no, it's not. It's just a perspective that needs to be checked. But nobody, again, wants to have a conversation.
Yeah. So we've really explored the behaviors. We explored, a lot of the trauma, things that went on back then. And I'm sure you guys are familiar with the whole Willie Lynch letter. Some people say that it's false. Some people say it's real. I don't know if it's false or real, but I know that some of the stuff that's in it is definitely true. And one part that always sticks out to me is how, when you talk about the making of a slave, and how if a slave would do these certain things, that it will be like a self-producing, self-fulfilling thing over a certain amount of years, over a century, I believe. I can't remember the exact thing. So, like I was saying, these are things that I still see even today. It may be in a different form, but it's sad to see that we are doing a lot of this stuff to ourselves now. We are doing a lot of this stuff to our women. Women are doing a lot of stuff to men. So I want to transition the conversation, before we disconnect, on how to heal from this stuff. you know, how to make things better. You know, with all this sexual miseducation that we've received as Black men, how it's been passed down through centuries and through generations. What do we do now? How do we fix this? How do we make it better for the next generation of men that's coming up behind us?
Own where we've been and where we are.
The first step.
Go ahead, Doc.
Oh, I was saying just owning where we've been. We've been talking a lot, and so one of my questions, for example, was, you know, we have all these media images of Black women, but how much of these images at this point have been driven by Black men in terms of the straight hair and the big butt and all these things that are wanted, right? But it's really acknowledging. It's awesome because I actually had this conversation with my boss friend the other day of healing between Black men and women. And to me, it's really owning where we've been, how we got here, but coming to a communal understanding of that common struggle that we share, not pushing against my struggle, your struggle, mine's worse, yours is worse, is whatever, but understanding as Black men and Black women, we have this struggle, period. It may look different because we're men and women, but we're in this together. We should be walking this together. So let me own my mess, you own yours, and let's form this proper partnership, like you said, Gregory, from the lens of love, and instead of the lens of one of the things I wanted to bring up was how Black men see Black women, some Black women, as masculine, right? And a lot of the times I bring up the argument that you have to remember, we had our husbands, our children taken from us. We had to do some of the same things that men had to do when it came to slavery and moving on up. And so that behavior has been passed down to us. So how do we then understand that some of our women are not like this because they want to be, it's because they have to be. So how do we work toward that? How do we identify the ways in which we supplement each other and complement each other?
How do we? Because that is a hot topic. I hear it more and more every day. Men calling women masculine, or they're acting masculine. How do we change that dynamic if we want to change it, or do we just sit back and continue to complain and point the finger and say you're masculine, you're feminine, and all this stuff?
I was going to say, even some women who call men feminine because they care or they show their emotion, right? Yeah. Sorry, Nathaniel.
Oh no! You brought up a great point. I was just going to say that we need to lead with empathy, though. I think that's one of the things, like you were saying, like Gregory was saying, you need to lead with love, but we need to lead with empathy. The idea that, you know, I understand that you've been through something. Yeah, I've been through something, but I can also see the fact that my pain does not negate the fact that you have gone through something as well. That's right. It's not a ball over, and making it not always about me, but about, you know what I'm saying, and being able to understand, like, look, just because I'm hurt doesn't necessarily mean, just because I'm hurt doesn't mean that I always have to focus on how hurt I am. I can sit back and say, I recognize the pain in you, and I can take the time out to say, are you okay? Are you okay to give my sister? I see what's going on with that. I want to make your life better. And when you lead with that level of, instead of competition, you know, you don't know what I've been through, you know, instead of having that competition, when you lead with that level of empathy, it changes the dynamic. But it takes two, but we all have to do it. Yeah. We have to lead that love, like Gregory was saying.
I'm going to say that it all starts with men. I'm going to own this for all the men. Is that, you know, it's a story in Genesis 32 about how Jacob wrestled with God. But the point of the wrestling match was that Jacob understood who he was to be able to live better and live a righteous life. Jacob had forgotten who he was. and all of a sudden God showed up in a man form called a theophany, and he wrestled with Jacob all night long, and he kept asking Jacob, "What's your name? What's your name? What's your name?" But he was asking him that so that he could remember who he was, and he eventually changed Jacob's name to Israel, which means one who prevails with God. My point in saying this is that we have to, first of all, now in 2022, realize how we have prevailed. Whether you believe in God or not, you prevail with the help of God. Whether you believe that or not, non-believers prevail with the help of God, whether you want to own it or not. And my thing is that two black men, black men, get back to understanding civilizations are created and destroyed with you. When they want to destroy a civilization, they get the men first. Take them out. You know, God created a man first for a reason. It was strategic. It has to begin and end with us. Doesn't make us the most important. It just means there's an order in things. And as a leader, let's own stuff that we've been afraid to own. Let's realize that some of the anger and the frustration we have to own, even if you didn't do it, but a man did it. And sometimes a woman needs to hear from a man, "Sister, I'm sorry. Sister, I'm sorry that someone broke your heart. Sister, I'm sorry that America does not see you for the beautiful queen you are. Sister, I'm sorry that you've had some experiences that have been unfavorable." Sometimes she needs to hear that so that she understands about who she is. But she has to see it in us first. She got to see us getting back to understanding who God made us to be, how we should be the priest, the prophet, provider, promoter in our homes. We have to get back to owning this and realizing that, you know what, it ain't about the white man, about the black man. What you gonna do now? I don't care how far you been set back. We have some things now. We didn't have things that ignore some of these crushes. We got to start calling other men out.
Somebody might
not being the men that they need to be. We got to start not being afraid.
Nate, try to mute your mic.
We got to stop being afraid to have conversations that might make people uneasy. We got to be afraid ourselves to call our own self out. Check yourself. You know, what about you was not right? What about you needs to change? We have to not be afraid, you know, to be vulnerable, not just with women, but with other men. We got to teach other men, no, don't cry in the dark, cry in the light. And understand that these tears help you wash away some things that need to be gone from your life. But these tears can also serve as the irrigation to the garden of your blessing, should you choose to move forward with a greater understanding. Like Jacob, his name was changed to Israel because God wanted him to be who I made you to be. And until men understand, that's what it's about. It's self-discovery of God within yourself. And I understand we don't all have the same religious belief. But the reality is, all the major religions have a common denominator. Do your research, do your history. That stuff always come back to the same God. But we've taken this stuff and we have gone this branch. We've gone this branch. We've gone this branch. But don't realize we're talking about the same God. Somebody call him Allah. You call him Jesus. Somebody call him this. You call him that. But the reality is, get back to who you are. And until you understand who you are, you're going to be like Tamia said, back to the book of R&B. In that song, Stranger in My House. You're going to be a stranger in your house.
Yeah.
A stranger, because you don't know who you are.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I'm mad. What's your thoughts on that, man? How do we make it different for the next generation?
So my thing is that we have to talk. I cannot stand looking at Facebook sometimes and hearing people try to instruct people on stuff because they're hollering at people, they're pointing fingers, but no people want to talk.
Yeah.
You
Every time he talks, that's when it freezes.
to talk, and you have to talk and scream at them. Sorry about that. And not have people scream at them. We had enough screaming. Let's be real. For both, between men and women, we had enough screaming. Let's talk. Let somebody say, okay, this is what the issue is, but let's get the solution as well. Because that's what the new generation is doing. The new generation learns how to scream. If you look at how the new generation communicates, how do they communicate on TikTok? How do they communicate on this? How do they communicate on that? When you see a man and woman communicating, it's mostly about somebody showing, how they would do it in a disagreeing way. You don't see a lot of people showing how they would come together and solve issues. Why is that? Because that is what we've put out. We've put out how to one person screams and the other person screams back. We have to communicate. Better communication is that's how we're going to help the next generation. Better communication.
But we have to communicate functionally, though. Yeah, and one of the things that I talk a lot to my students is about dialogue. If you're reading a book, you're not going to see two people talking at the same time. You see one person and another person, and leaving space to listen, not just hear, but to listen more than you talk, and really take in what a person is saying to you. So to some of the points that have been made, we got to be able to take in criticism without always thinking that somebody is out for our downfall.
Testify.
And we have to be able to. So Bell Hooks, everybody knows me. I'm going to mention Bell Hooks and her book. She's got a couple of books, but one is called How to Love, or About Love. And she talks about how we don't properly know how to love because we weren't properly taught how to love. And so going along with what we've been talking about, right? We have not, as Black people, been taught how to love because of the way that we have been conditioned. And so where we start is learning how to love, because we don't have excuses anymore. One of the coolest things that I heard was, of course, the Bible says, love your neighbor as you love yourself, but we don't love ourselves. So how are we expected to love our neighbor? We have to learn how to love ourselves first. We have to learn, and not so much that you exalt yourself over somebody else. You have to learn how to love yourself, love your, as it said in psychology, your core of rot, or your shadow, and incorporate that into who you are, because you cannot expect somebody to love you the way you need to be loved if you don't know how to love yourself in the way you need to love. And I hear you, Gregory, in terms of, men have a responsibility, but women have a responsibility too, because at this stage, toxic masculinity, as a lot of people will call it, or patriarchy, has affected women too, in a way that is, ain't no man gonna run me, and so on and so forth. And women too will buck their chests out and exert their masculinity and their power. And then there are women like myself, don't call me no independent woman, because there's a stigma that comes with that. I love my men. I am a codependent person. And so it's I'm not this way because I want to be. I'm this way because I have to be. And that's intimidating to some men because of some of the things that we've talked about. But the one thing as a woman in my place is that I absolutely love when I can take off my boss hat and sit and allow my man to allow me to move in my femininity. That is awesome. But as a woman, I have to give him that space as well. And not try to be in competition like you were talking about, Nathaniel. Like, if we're walking on the same road and we're going in the same direction, what's the point in me walking ahead or behind you and we not walking together and having these conversations and making that walk even more of an enjoyable and blessed walk?
I think one of the biggest challenges that we don't come to the table as a fully healed person. We don't come to relationships fully healed. So, we would love to learn to love and learn to walk with each other side by side. But we have to overcome a lot of the pain, a lot of the distrust, a lot of the hurt, a lot of the anger that we've experienced in the past before we even, enter into relationships. I mean, we could, but it's just not going to be a fully functioning, healthy relationship if you do. I always say that in order to be in a healthy relationship, you have to be a healthy individual. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't heal before they venture into relationships, and they end up in those cycles of unhealthy, toxic relationships. So, yes, healing, in my view, is so important, even if it's from like the past trauma, vicarious trauma, or just lessons that has been passed down to us from grandmom or grandpops and pops or your big brother. Like all those unhealthy lessons that we learn, that's a form of healing that we need before we can really walk hand in hand with each other. Because we come to the table with differences, but instead of celebrating our differences, we look at each other as villains because they're different. Look at, like y'all said, as each other as competition because we're differences. Instead of saying, hey, you got some differences, I got some differences. Where you're strong, maybe you can, and where I'm weak, we can put those things together. Instead, we'll criticize each other because of that.
Yeah.
Because
well, and the question is, how do we heal if we don't even like ourselves?
Ooh.
Right? A lot of people are real uncomfortable with sitting with themselves. And my question is, if you cannot be your own best friend, how do you expect other people to treat you? How can you heal if you don't even want to sit with yourself? So I would bring that. Now, I have a huge question that I definitely want to hear from y'all as men. So we're talking about slavery and sexual trauma. How do you as men transform the idea of sex and sexuality in order to have greater relationships? If that makes sense. I heard earlier how we may characterize a man, and I mean we as in society, characterize a man based on the size of his manhood, which his manhood is equated to his penis, right? And so in our relationships, sex becomes a huge part of the relationship, which can also foster unhealthy relationships because we are relying so much on that feeling that we get from sex to make us happy. And in my mind and in my belief, in order to transform those relationships and build greater relationships, we have to transform the way we view sex and sexuality and our relationships and within our relationships. So how as a man would you, so if I asked you to talk to my 14-year-old son of how he would transform his idea of sex and sexuality from whatever he's been told, whatever he sees in the media, right? So that he can have greater relationships. What would you tell him? Or what
First, I want to say that how you going to just go deep with a question? Because we
ain't got that much time. I had to make sure to get that out.
Let me say this real quick.
Great question.
It's a wonderful question. It is. I would, first of all, I would say that we have to censor our relationship with sex because it has been a very aggressive relationship. We call it things that are so aggressive. Beat it up, tear it up. Once that becomes your behavior towards this woman, abusive. So let's take, first of all, the aggression out of sex. From a church standpoint, start having the conversation about what sex is, about sexuality, and stop just talking about don't have sex before you get married. We already know that. They need the pastors, men and women, to start talking about what is God's design for sex? What is the biological purpose for sex? What is sex designed to do? sex is not a bad thing, but it's so taboo everywhere. Inside the church, especially because we've given it a negative stigma. We only talk about it in a one-dimensional aspect. I'm talking to a young man, I'm going to start with human reproduction and make sure that he or our little Sally understands human biology. You have a penis. He has a vagina. These two things are meant for this, are meant for that. Make sure that they're educated properly on, it's not called what you hear in the rap song. It's called this biologically. It is not meant for you to beat anything up. You know, sex for young adults and middle-aged adults has become the thing that makes a decision instead of making a decision to have sex. You see what I'm saying? It's like when we look for sex to tell us something about this person, to make a decision if I should be with them, instead of learning who they are and not allowing your emotions to get wrapped around this person sexually, and an emotional decision results in a bad relationship, because good sex can make a bad relationship last too long. And until we start keeping it real, 100 with people, and even from a chemistry standpoint, there are a lot of millennials especially who are so doped up, not on cocaine, but on serotonin, dopamine, that is created when you have sexual attraction or sexual intercourse. So now the way that you think is determined now by what? By the feelings of sex, the feelings of lust. And now you're having all of this sex. Why? Because you want to feel good. So now you've taken all the rationalization off of the fact. The creator said that your body is a temple. You know what I'm saying? Your creator says that it's a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable unto God. That's what your body, that's what sex is supposed to be about. It's an expression of something between this woman, between this man, more specific, between the husband and the wife. But we don't even love the people that we're intimate with. We could give two anythings about these people, because the only thing, and it boils back to your point, Doc T, about you can't love somebody as you love yourself if you don't love yourself. So my sex and everything I give to this person, sorry for being long, is a result of unknown factors. So I'm giving this person essentially nothing but a moment.
Yeah.
That's why you feel empty afterwards. I ain't giving you
nothing.
I think for me, you know, and I should say a lot of young men, like it's the conditioning, it's the programming that we receive from very young that makes us view sex in a certain type of way. We're conditioned to be emotionally detached from sex. Yeah. You know, we're programmed to see sex as a way to measure our manhood. You know, the more women that you have sex with, the cooler you are. The guy that has the most girls, he's the one that's champion. He's the one that's celebrated. So I think it's so important for us to start celebrating and championing our young men for something aside from that, for other accomplishments, for start celebrating them for the person they are, celebrating them for how they perform in school, or, you know, if they're responsible, for, you know, just the real inner characteristics of who they are. If we can start celebrating that, you know, even I'm not saying it's easy, because, you know, due to society, social media, friends, like they're getting the message that, you know, sex is paramount. So we have to try to raise our voices and celebrate those other things in life. And to be honest, a lot of the times they may not get this until they get a little bit older, a little bit wiser and more mature. After you start to really measure the risk and the rewards of sex, you know, outside of marriage, you don't truly understand why it might be smarter for you to abstain, or smarter for you to you know, make better decisions when it comes to sex. Because I can tell you from personal experience, I've wasted, I shouldn't say spent, I've wasted a lot of time. I've wasted a lot of energy. I wasted a lot of money. I put myself in some very dangerous situations chasing sex, you know, and the risk of the thing that I put myself, the position I put my life into, or my finances in, or just my time, was not worth the reward that I received at the end. So sometimes we have to truly, but you know, go through those things and understand, you know, it's not even worth it sometimes. The thing that's little, you know, 10 minutes, 15 minutes of pleasure that you think you're gonna get, that could result into so much drama. It can result into so much frustration, so much conflict, you know, so much wasting of resources that is not worth it. But
True.
That stuff comes with wisdom. That stuff comes with experience most of the time, because the pull and the temptation of sex is so strong that a lot of men have to go through it before they totally understand, you know, the consequences of their decisions.
True.
I would say, oh, I'm sorry.
Well, first of all, can you guys see me? I don't know. My camera's it froze for some reason. I don't know if you guys can see me moving.
We can hear you. We can hear you, but you're frozen.
Okay. All right. But I just personally, I believe that there's an emphasis. You know, I believe that what you focus on expands. There's an oversized emphasis on sex, specifically among young men. And what we need to do is explain and really and truly emphasize amongst our young brothers what relationships really are, what they're about, like what they really are at their core. And like, you know, I was listening to it was a guy online. I was listening to a program, and he was just talking about like the visceral nature of relationships, like like the stuff that they don't show you. Like, you know, a lot of times we think that a relationship is you go out and you have all these great, amazing feelings, and you have sex, and the sex is amazing, and then, you know, and that's and then you fade, and then the story fades to black. You know, or maybe they get married or whatever, and then the story fades to black. But the nuts and bolts of what a day-to-day real relationship is that teaching is sorely lacking within our communities. You know, to be able to tell our young brothers, yo, it's not going to always. One of my favorite authors, Dr. Ron Elmore, used to love to say, he loves to say, it's not always going to be Christmas in your relationships. It's like, you know, Christmas, you know, Christmas is going to come, and then it's going to pass. But you got to understand that it's going to always come back around at some point. But it's not always going to be great. But, you know, a lot of times within our relationships, the emphasis is on just the sex, but it's not on the rest of it. the stuff the other stuff that makes the relationship great. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. And we need to really and truly emphasize to our young brothers the other stuff, as opposed to just the greatness of the sex or the excitingness of the sex. That other stuff is really important, and it needs to be emphasized, and it needs to be talked about. And that's something that we don't talk about. We don't talk about the all of the vulnerability, the safety, and that you get inside of a relationship, inside of real relationship. You know, we don't talk about that if it's working well. You know, that level of safety as a man that you can find when you find when they say, well, I don't know, Pastor, I don't know the verse, but I do know that it says something along the lines of when a man findeth a wife, he finds a good thing.
Yes, sir.
One of the reasons that is because you found some place where you can be safe.
Mm-hmm.
That virtuous woman.
Yeah.
Testify.
So,
but we need to emphasize. I just feel like we need to emphasize those things. But all right, I'm gonna let you guys go ahead on and keep going because it's weird hearing myself talk and not being able to see myself move.
Nathaniel said something. You talking about a 14-year-old? I would sit him down and I would say, how do you see your mom? How do you see your sister? How do you see your aunts? How do you see them? You know, and ask them what when you see them, what do you look at? So then tell them in that aspect, okay, they're nice, they're sweet, they're pretty. You want to protect them. So some outside girl that you see, what is different than her than, you know, your mom, your aunts, your sisters? Then I would tell mom, come in, mom, tell your son how he should react to even a girl that's not his family. Because it's drilled in us, protect your family, protect your sister, protect your aunt. It's not drilled in us, protect the outside girl. It's not drilled in us. We sit there and we're like, she ain't nothing. She ain't nothing. She ain't nothing. I don't got to do it because I know I did it. And I'm sure some of you all on the panel did it. She ain't nothing. Fact. You know? So have her tell. If you know, have the mom tell. If you would go out and I heard, son, that you treated this woman wrong, it would hurt me to my heart. It would hurt me to my heart so that he can start developing, okay, I don't want to make my mom sad. I want to treat this woman like I treat my sisters and things of that nature. You have to, I guess, even at a young age, inbred in them what they should be looking for, how they should react, who they should be looking for. We don't do that enough. We don't do that enough. That's what I would tell. That's what I would start off with a young brother about.
Yeah. And I know we have to go, AB, but I said 14-year-old just because it's easier to talk to a 14-year-old as opposed to a 30, 40, 50-year-old man who has been set in his ways. But I would personally encourage people to because we're talking about people who would look like us and act like us, but not those, like, for example, men who project the sins of their mother onto women.
Right.
And those types of things. And so, yeah. I've talked about
that's a whole show there.
That was a great question. You should have asked more.
Oh, I got a whole list. We didn't have enough time.
I told you to start from the top.
We still didn't have enough time.
Y'all got time for one more questions, brothers?
I mean, ask it.
Do it.
Oh my God! Now I gotta.
You can't see my reactions anyway.
No,
we got time for
that was
one
of my biggest questions in terms of how do we get people to think differently about sex and sexuality. So one of the things that I know I talk about a lot is tantra, and people are like, oh, that's just about sex and doing freaky things, and no, it's not. It's really about meditation.
Tantra.
Okay. And how it's about meditation and being comfortable with yourself and all the parts of yourself, and then being able to share that with other people. But one thing I want to point out is the term CTSD. We don't talk about that a lot. It's not PTSD. It's not post-traumatic stress syndrome. It is complex traumatic stress syndrome, meaning the continual trauma that we go through. And so how do we, and I think I've heard this as well, but how do we support each other through that when we are talking about that vicarious trauma, right? The things that we carry within us from our ancestors, because it's in our DNA. It's in our DNA. We have that generational trauma as well in the way that we, you know, move about society. So, you know, what are your active tips for moving forward, and not talking to the people that, you know, not preaching to the choir, but talking to the people that don't typically listen to us.
Yeah, you got to meet people where they are. You know, the great R&B prophetess Erykah Badu said, "Bag lady, you're gonna hurt your back, dragging out of bags like that." A person has to be willing to address their own self-sabotage, and we have to be willing to see how unhealthy behaviors across the board, whether it is romantically, professionally, personally, are hurting us. And to do that, and to address your question, you have to be willing to unlearn certain behaviors that you once lived by. You got to be willing to understand that everything that Big Mama told you don't apply today. Everything Big Mama said ain't necessarily even true. But you have to realize truth from what just sounds good. And until a person, I can never relate to you, man or woman, until I have been able to pull together who I am today, who I was yesterday, and who I'm trying to be. And a lot of trauma comes because it is so much easier to trust a devil that we know from yesterday than to step into a future in anything that I know I should be, but I have no understanding of what lies behind this door. And sometimes the trauma comes from, I'm having right now some personal anxiety. I'm having some personal trauma in this moment that is just about this moment because I don't know which way to move. So I can't even begin to relate to you or help you through your struggle because I have no peace within. And a lot of times we put unhealthy expectations on other folk. Like the one thing that men say that is stop saying is that I need her to be my peace. No, you don't. No, you don't. Because you have placed an expectation on her that is an impossibility. Because God is Jehovah Shalom, not her. Now, what you need her to do, and vice versa, is to be at peace with yourself. Because once you have found some peace within, now we can help each other through our personal traumas. Now we can come together now and even be compatible in a friendship, compatible in a relationship. Because I got peace within. Now I'm not putting expectations on you to save me or to restore me. Those are divine things that human beings can't do. So my thing is, what for the Christian and the non-Christian, the common denominator is us finding that peace within and realizing that, you know what, until I address the elephant, the self-sabotage, till I unlearn some things from the past, till I realize that I have to start making decisions that are best for me and stop saying what your daddy said, what your mama said. What do you say?
Oh no.
What is right for you? What do you know? What have you learned? The Bible says that wisdom is the principal thing. But then all you're getting, get understanding. And that goes back to what? Listening. For the Christian, faith comes by what? Hearing. And hearing what? The word of God. Even for the non-Christian, your knowledge and understanding comes by hearing. Hearing knowledge, hearing truth. It's all the same thing. But until we start doing those, and I'm done, we'll never be at a point to even address each other's trauma or address your own, because you are living your life like nothing is wrong. Because you've made abnormal normal. And you've never met anybody who will help you call your own self out, address your own self-sabotage.
Yeah, I think it's so important for, especially speaking for men that's dealing with trauma or, complex trauma. you have to find a safe environment first. And that sometimes that means that, not sometimes, all the time, it means that you have to remove yourself from whatever toxic, unhealthy situation, people, environment that you're in, and put yourself, find a place of peace.
You have to create that.
Yeah, you have to create it. You have to remove yourself, whatever it takes. You definitely have to separate yourself from that first before you can start any type of healing or any type of work on with the trauma that you're going through, because you're not going to overcome it if you're surrounded by the same people, if you're in the same environment, if you're dealing with the same challenges and still wrestling with the same challenges. So you have to learn to remove yourself from there. And you have to learn how to develop relationships with people that are going to hold you accountable. For your own behaviors. You don't want to develop relationships with people that are yes men, people that overlook your toxic or bad behaviors. You want to develop true friendships with, and I would preferably say men that will hold you accountable and call you on things, but also to be sensitive enough to and empathetic enough to feel your pain. And I think probably most important, you have to find like qualified people. Everybody's not qualified to deal with your trauma. Everybody is not trained to help you come out of trauma. Yes, it's good to go see your pastor. It's good to go talk to your uncle. It's good to talk to a trusted friend. But sometimes, a lot of the times, you have to find a qualified therapist to help you with this trauma that you're going through. And everybody's not equipped to deal with those situations. And there are people that have been educated and trained and practiced, taking people through that trauma, and you have to go find those type of individuals. So it's really about just surrounding yourself with the right people, because none of us can do it by ourselves. We're good for isolating ourselves and thinking that all we have to do is we'll get over it. And a lot of the times that's what leads us back to this this unhealthy sexual habits, because we think that sex, we use it as a way to cover over our pain. We use sex as a way to distract us from our hurt and our trauma, because we don't know how to express our feelings, or we don't want to heal from the pain, or we don't want to face the pain. So sex is often a great escape from our painful reality. And that happens to that sexual miseducation of Black men. We often do that. So the healing is so important, and putting yourself in the right environment and surrounded by the right people.
So AB, hashtag heal before you deal.
Yes.
You have to get into, to be really, you have to get into enlightened communities. You have to get into healthy communities. You gotta, a lot of us want to stay with our Facebook, who we know on Facebook. We all love to laugh. Sorry about the network. We all love to laugh. We all love to have fun. We like to look at stuff to make us laugh, but we don't want to have stuff that is going to make us think. Am I right? Am I doing things right? Is this making me change? Am I going towards a darker path? And stuff like this will help a lot of people. Stuff like this will, make people understand, okay, you know what? I gotta do something different. I can't keep going this way. And this is for men and women. I can't keep, lying in his bed and he's lying to me. I can't keep, laying down with her and this is really not making me feel like a man. Stuff like this will make people understand. But we have to be willing to go to stuff like this. We can't be scared of stuff like this, because stuff like this shines a light on us. We have to be more willing to be accountable and be held accountable.
People are afraid to learn, and they don't want to learn.
Absolutely.
That's what I was going to say.
To learn will force you to change. And there are so many people, men and women. It is true when the Bible talks about being transformed by the renewing of your mind. That is so true, because when you learn, when you understand, when you seek knowledge, you are really forced to do better. You're forced to get rid of excuses. You're forced to stop blaming your behavior on other people. You are forced to address your own self-sabotage. You are forced and put in a position to now you have no excuse. You can't say what you didn't learn in childhood because you know now. And we would rather be on the phone, call Tyrone, as opposed to getting off Facebook and putting your face in the book and reading something that can feed your brain and impact your life. People don't realize that when, to your point about your circle of people, when everybody in your circle is having the same negative experiences professionally, personally, romantically, that's why you having them. Because y'all are feeding each other's trauma. You're feeding each other's bad experience. And if we're all having these same negative experiences, guess what? Ain't none of y'all got no wisdom to give to the other person so that somebody can start to do better. But it is true when the elders say, misery loves company. Miserable people stick together like no ends. When we have so much trauma, so much misery, we cling to other people. There are relationships that are formed out of trauma because I can relate to you on this level. This becomes our relationship. This becomes our love. You understand me because you just as jacked up as I am. And we feel like you won't judge me, I won't judge you. When the reality is not about judgment. It is about how can we help each other. And until we start asking the question about friendship, relationship, business, or whatever, that what part of you is growing as a result of that relationship? What are you learning? It's got to be about, even when you go into church, what are you learning? If you're just jumping and shouting, you can do church. What are your personal experiences in life? Are you just having bad experiences, but then seeking to not address the why? Are you just going through life with no purpose, no aim, no goal, nothing you're shooting for, to where you're just wandering aimlessly in life, and that will feed any trauma that already exists? Or are you living your life and confusing the desires of your heart with the desires of your mind? These are two different things. What are you seeking in life? We are so out of tune with self.
But we have to talk.
Said, to our own self be true. We can't do that.
That question,
we know ourselves, but we don't.
We have to talk though about, we're talking about slavery. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just saying the question that Gregory is asking, I think that's a great question. And I think that's a great question for us to ponder on as men and as ladies. But being that this is the sexual miseducation of Black men, we should start asking ourselves that, and also asking the next generation of men that, what are you learning? That question, what are you learning? Not only what are you learning, but what are we teaching them? We know what society is teaching them. We know what social media is teaching them. So as men, we have to kind of stand up and step out and start to teach them a different lesson, or else they're going to continue to repeat the cycle that all the previous generations have been repeating. So we have to re-educate them. I call this the sexual miseducation, but the real purpose of this is to re-educate them on something different, for them to find their real purpose, figure out the real ways to measure their manhood. And that's a great question. So before we log off, please, if somebody wants to contact you, if somebody have more questions, or if you got something coming up, please let the people know. And let me say, before we disconnect, let me say thank you for this great conversation.
Thank you all. I do I want to end with this because we're talking about slavery, and to both of your points, AB and Gregory, that it is breaking those chains of society, in that society and media tells us who we should be, how we should be in our relationships, and so on and so forth. And it's really separating from that, as it's not a reality. Is not real. It is intentionally put out and exploited for a reason, and we have to understand that. And so breaking that chain. But I am. You can email me, but you can catch me on Facebook, TD West. I am also at Virtuous Woman WMN 31 at Gmail. And hopefully, AB, you will be joining my crew for our Power Hour one of these Thursdays that we have on Facebook Live 12 to 1, and we'll put that out when we get to that. This has been an amazing conversation, and if I may, while we're talking about this, my baby's asleep, but I hope that he understands. Not my little baby and my man. I want to thank both of them for showing me what true masculinity looks like. It is so beautiful.
That's awesome.
All right. Gregory.
Well, I am Gregory Devon, and I have thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. You know, and you can reach me on Facebook, my name, Gregory Devon. You can reach me on Instagram, Gregory_Devon. You want to shout at me on Twitter at Gregory Devon. And let me say to you, Doc T, as the only female on the panel tonight, not that I ever doubted you could hold your own, because I knew that coming in, but I appreciated the fact that, unlike some, you brought an attitude of it's about both parties, men and women. Because one of the things that is difficult for men sometimes is to engage in conversation where everything is always a man's fault, you know, or even in perspectives, you know, it's not equally shared in terms of responsibility. So kudos to you, my brother Ahmed. Always a pleasure, man, being on with you. AB, you know what it is, man. We've been on so many of these things together. You know, and to your God brother who may be still watching, it was great to encounter and meet him as well. And I thoroughly enjoyed all your perspectives. God bless.
So you can meet me. You can contact me on Facebook. My name is Ahmed Mwanza Butler. I also have a page with my wife, Living Real in the Kingdom. That's Living Real in the Kingdom. And like you know what Doc T and Gregory said, and Nathaniel, I thoroughly, AB, thank you so much, because I love stuff like this. I love stuff that you can break down the history, you can go into it. It takes some research, and it takes some coming out real. So thank you again.
I thank all of y'all for being a part of the show. This was great conversation. I was taking down notes. This is the Sexual Miseducation of Black Men. My name is AB Bracewell. You can catch me on Instagram under the same name, or on YouTube under the same name, Sexual Miseducation of Black Men. Have a good night.
Good night, everybody.